Welcome to this Marketing Kind Exchange. And today we are going to be asking a really easy question to answer, which is, can marketing save the planet? Of course, the answer to that is yes, but there's a bit more to it than that, isn't there? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Caroline Taylor. I'm really delighted to be your host today. I previously spent many years working for IBM, eventually becoming the Chief Marketing Officer for IBM's global business until I retired back in 2020. Since then, I've been volunteering in the education sector, and I now chair the board of Oasis Education, which is a multi-academy trust running 54 schools, all in very challenging, deprived areas of the country. I've also been working over many years, I guess for nearly 20 years now, on sustainability challenges. And I have an abiding belief in the power of both individuals and organizations to change the narrative and therefore the outcome. Now, as a marketer in the day, I saw the potential for revenue generation through serving and solving IBM clients' sustainability challenges. But also personally, and especially since the arrival of my first grandchild in 2011, I have viewed the world through the lens of a grandparent, and feel a desperate need to secure the future, not only for my grandchildren, but for their entire generation. And that is a pretty powerful motivation for change. The good news, I hope you'd agree, is that social and environmental issues are thankfully increasingly being moved to the top of boardroom agendas. The challenge is it fast enough? Well, today we're going to be exploring some of the most high-profile environmental and sustainability challenges that face businesses, but importantly, the practical solutions from the world of marketing to address those. And we're going to do that with two preeminent marketers who have demonstrated for all of us practical and realistic ways in which marketers can drive positive impact, and show that even in the age of consumerism, marketing can indeed be a force for good. They are Gemma, Butler and Michelle Carvill. They're co-authors of Sustainable Marketing and the very recently published Can Marketing Save the Planet? They're also hosts of a fabulous podcast of the same name. Gemma is a strategic, collaborative and ideas-driven leader who likes to challenge convention. She's former marketing director at the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and she is a speaker and guest lecturer. Michelle is an experienced marketer championing sustainable marketing and rethinking marketing, committed to aligning and educating the approximately 10.6 million marketers, I wonder who counted, on the planet. She's an agency founder and a consultant, and is certified carbon literate. She's also a Chartered Institute of Marketing course director and a Thinkers 360 top 50 thought leaders in sustainability. Now, Michelle and Gemma have also launched a new event, the Conference of Marketers, Com1, in this year. You see what they did there? Although, to be fair, they would describe it as less of an event and more of an action outcome-focused working party. Now, you're going to get a taste of the thinking which informs that in the next hour. If you've already read Can Marketing Save the Planet, and I'm now going to hold up my precious copy. Maybe like me, you were struck by both the enormity of the task and yet the absolute positivity of the insight and advice. In fact, I did wonder if maybe their publishers had missed a trick. It occurred to me that surely a book like this should come in true Douglas Adams style with the words "Don't panic" inscribed in large friendly letters on its cover. Because this is a book that is both a compelling why-to guide for those who need to be inspired and nudged towards taking sustainability action, but at the same time, a highly effective how-to guide for those who've already figured out their why, but need actionable advice in both strategic and tactical ways forward. Now, Gemma and Michelle have so much wisdom to share with us, but I'd like to start with something that comes at the end of their book. What they call the tribal wisdom of Dakota Indians, which can be summarized with this statement: when you discover that you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. It's clear that there are many politicians who could benefit from that advice. But Michelle and Gemma, what about the rest of us? Tell us more.
Oh, Michelle. Well, I mean, we wanted to. Gemma came across that it's kind of like a bit of a poem, isn't it? The whole the
Dakota
thing
Indians.
yeah.
I saw it on a quote. It was like on a cartoon quote.
Yeah.
And it came with a load of advice on it. And I just thought, as we were writing the book and coming up with 101 chapters was quite a task. And I just thought it was a really nice summary at the end of what is, a lot of reading to go. We are flogging a dead horse in a lot of cases, aren't we? And there comes a point when in reality you're going to have to get off and do something different. And I think that was the real shift, wasn't it, Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely. And there were two elements that we ended the book with. One was kind of like the sense check of, look, there's all of this stuff that we've gone through, 99 chapters of practicalities of what we do. And for those of you that haven't read the book, we structured the book around a kind of situation analysis through to objectives, through to strategy, through to tactics, and then down to metrics. And we tried as much as we could to cover all of the topics that we'd had conversations with guests on our podcast. We've had over 75 conversations, but also about the learnings, traditional stuff that we'd been doing in our careers for the last 30 years. And also increasingly the conversations we'd been having with marketers, organizations, brands, where over the past few years, we'd had but they'd invited us in, the privilege of being invited in to listen to their real challenges, to understand the things that they were getting stuck with, and to identify and think, how can we actually create some impactful solutions. So we wanted it to be very strategic, practical, useful, but we also needed to keep it very human and practical. And I think those last two chapters, one is about, look, have the reality check, realize when sometimes there is just nothing you can do in the situation you're in. So you have to rethink things, perhaps, if nobody's listening to you. And then the second piece there was also about, what about your own mindset? What about your own health and well-being around how you manage this, which is often a hugely overwhelming and challenging area for not just marketers, but as for humans. And so we wanted to include those elements into the book. So the first one's quite humorous. The second one is a little bit more grounded.
I think they're both hugely grounded, actually, and I love that Dakota Indian Native American example. It's just there's not enough clear, simple, straightforward advice in the world, and even where it is, we're not always very good at following it, are we? So I love it. Let's go back to the why question, and particularly for the two of you. What were the key moments that inspired you both to realise the need for business to change, and to realise that marketing and marketers can have a pivotal role in that change?
I think it definitely started when Michelle and I was at the Chartered Institute of Marketing at the time, and was commenting a lot more and not realizing it on sustainability issues and consumption and waste and the use of plastic. And it wasn't until I started chatting away to Michelle, usually when we went out for drinks, that it was becoming a little bit like, we are, marketing's not the best profession, is it, in relation to sustainability? These things aren't really, they're not meeting up. And actually I was growing my awareness of the issues, which I hadn't really thought about. I spent the first 14 years of my career as a proposition developer and buyer driving products. I sold consumer electronics for Sony. And it was just how much I could sell of those. And so I started becoming more and more aware, and Michelle was starting to feel the same way. So we stopped moaning about it and decided that we would write a book about it. And it was through that we started to learn more and more and more about things that we hadn't heard of, such as the UN SDGs, the B Corp movement, the Paris Climate Agreement. And, in a normal setting as a marketer, you'd think, well, these have got nothing to do with me. These are for the sustainability department or for some other department. But then you realize that sustainability isn't, like digital, something you can leave at the office and go home. It's something you take home with you. And, Caroline, you talk about your you know, looking at it through the eyes of a grandparent, and I have a 10-year-old daughter, and suddenly you think, oof, you know, where are we heading with this? And the conversation just became louder and louder as we went through 2020, as we wrote the book in 2021. And that's the point at which we realized that we were kind of in the right place at the right time in terms of when the book came out. So it was that moment of seeing things that you can't unsee, and then realizing that the profession you're actually in and represent is a significant part of the problem. But actually, if we take our skills and our, you know, our capability as communicators and telling stories and shaping behaviors, we can actually be a significant part of the solution, because we have got us to where we are today.
Yeah, and to echo much of that, I mean, my focus had probably started a lot earlier, but more around animal welfare. So, you know, I was the 14-year-old camping outside abattoirs, you know, stopped eating meat when I was 10, and couldn't kind of get my head around some of the practices. And of course, as I've grown up, those practices have continued, and I've worked with many leadership teams, and I've always had this frustration and tension around, it doesn't really mean anything, you know, a lot of what we're doing. And of course, I was part of that. And I was just increasingly becoming disillusioned with driving growth, getting more, especially in the digital landscape, you know, when it all started to shift. And personally, I didn't feel that my values and purpose were being fulfilled. And I guess there was that element of frustration that, as Gemma said, when we met and we would have conversations, I would be talking about some of those elements with her, and there was this collision of ideas that we needed to change things.
Fantastic, absolutely. It's very interesting, isn't it, as we think about that I take absolutely what you say, Gemma, you know, marketing, you know, being a big part of the problem, particularly around consumerism, and that, you know, endless focus on, you know, selling more. And as we think about marketers and their pivotal role in all of this, there's a balance, isn't there, between the role of fantastic marketing, delivering the messages that will hopefully influence and change people, but as well, there's an opportunity here for fantastic marketers to really be in their organizations defining the sustainability opportunity, and the actions that can be taken. As you said, it's not just about the somebody with a sustainability word in their job title. How you know, how would you guide any of us as marketers, anybody who's with us today or watching the replay or listening to the podcast, how would you help them think about the balance between those two positions? Because actually marketers can play a key role in either one of them, but it's, you know, how do you weigh up where you're going to have the most impact?
I think there's two ways of looking at it, and we kind of separate this out in the book. There's marketing sustainability, and then there's sustainable marketing. And the marketing sustainability piece is the organization has got its sustainability agenda, whatever that looks like, whether it's there or not, whether it's about to come into fruition, whether it's embedded. And often there is a real challenge that sustainability agenda hasn't been cascaded throughout the organization. The amount of teams that we've worked with over the past few years where we're talking to them and we're giving them insights about what their organization is doing from the sustainability agenda, and they're saying, this is amazing. This is, oh my goodness, I never knew we were doing this. Where did you get that information? Well, it's in your impact report, you know, and they're not privy to what is going on. It's not all inclusive. It's not aligned. And that is such a missed opportunity, because of course we need the marketers to be involved with what's being put outside, because they are the lens that sits both in the inside, brand, consumer, but also are the connection interface between the outside of the business. And so there is this marketing sustainability going on the inside. What are we doing? How do we all get on the same bus and drive in the same direction to really drive momentum, drive innovation, drive ideas, drive collected shared purpose within the business? But then there is also then the sustainable marketing piece, which is how do we actually put a responsible lens across every single thing that we do from a marketing landscape perspective. So how do we look at all of the activities? How do we look at all of the impact? And how do we make sure that we are greening that as much as we can, making it as responsible as much as we can, and also making sure that both this marketing sustainability and sustainable marketing are actually aligned cohesively to the objectives of the business. And from a marketing perspective, that is often to do with the metrics around growing or moving into new territories. But increasingly, as organizations are shifting their focus towards decarbonisation, for example, or more social impact or community focus or social value, and that's becoming increasingly important for organizations, then it makes sense for marketers to have a different set of objectives that align with that agenda. So I think it's a case of understanding and getting really, really clear about what the organization is doing from that marketing sustainability and supporting that within the business throughout the business, which comes back into strategic purpose and making sure that everything is running through like that DNA through the stick of rock, but then also making sure that we're looking at everything we do, partnerships, alliances, activities, absolutely everything with a different lens.
Got it. Thank you. And I should point out that the last sort of major section, apart from those two bits that you talked about earlier, the last few chapters, but the last major section in the book actually goes through every sort of communication vehicle and how we can think about each of them differently, which I think is just I love the book for everything that's terribly strategic about it, but there is something really fabulous, isn't there, in having somebody has done the thinking.
Yeah,
Almost like a checklist to help us think about that. All right, I'm running you guys are running an event soon,
Yeah.
how do you think about that, all the different elements, because it's very easy to miss one and until it's too late. So I think that's fantastic. Sort of almost back to the consumer point we were on earlier, but this idea of know your customer has been a mantra for us as marketers, hasn't it? For well, I guess forever, but sort of hammered into us educationally and experientially over the decades. But I'm thinking that it becomes existentially important as we navigate our way to net zero. What are your kind of key observations or top tips on how we gain and use customer insight to shape our sustainable marketing?
It was interesting, actually, because you talk about knowing our customers, and we interviewed a lady called Sandy Skees from Porto Novelli, and every year they do a piece of research around the intention action gap. And for the first time last year, there was double-digit shift in not action intention in terms of purchasing, but action intention in terms of people willing to change their behaviors on a scale of somewhat willing to change to willing to change to already changed. And that was a really interesting point. She said that doesn't necessarily translate into them wanting to purchase something, but that is showing a customer or a societal shift in people who want to change how they eat, how they use energy, how they travel, all of the things where marketers then are looking at, bringing those insights back into their organizations around their products and services and things like that. And that was just a really interesting conversation to have, because it's, know your customers and bring that insight back in. And we generally then translate that into what products we can sell them. But actually, there's an entire shift in living behaviors that is happening. And I think that's something that marketers absolutely need to look at as an overall change within society that will then bring out things like, how do we then look at circular economy? How do we wrap a service around what we do? How do we fundamentally change the business models that are kind of holding us back and move? And e-vehicles is obviously a prime example. But how do we take those shifts forward? So I think, it was just a really interesting thing in that this isn't just about people wanting to buy different products. It's not about people wanting to just buy green products. This is about a complete shift in how we live, and we have to, because of, everyone's experiencing to some degree changes in terms of the weather and pollution and all of those things. So I think it's a much bigger shift than just knowing your customers and what they like, and then features and benefits. And we are actually going to have to start moving towards a different way of living, which I think will ultimately drive much harder that external pressure on organization and business to start moving, hopefully, faster and driving change at a larger scale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, Caroline, also just on that point, that often when we are, again, working in the landscape, practically talking to marketers, not many of them are including sustainability and climate sentiment in their consumer insights research.
Interesting.
So it's not standard. It's not something that everybody's already doing, and that surprises me, that isn't kind of just part of the mainstream, but it isn't. And it's often one of the things we say, oh, when we looked at that, we're not actually we're not going into too much detail about those areas. And so it's a case of, if we're not asking the question, we're not going to get the insights.
I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that feels like a wonderful opportunity for competitive advantage for those who do. If it's just something that so many organizations are just not looking at the moment and not paying attention to, because it has the potential to be such a drive. And I know that, there's always going to be a gap between what people say they'd like to do and what they will do. It's the, I don't know, giving up meat thing, isn't it? Or, how many people will versus how many people actually do it. But yeah, I think that's I'm not sure whether to be thrilled for the forward thinkers who will be on that and gain an advantage from it, or appalled.
Well, she called it, she said, instead of calling it competitive advantage, we should look at it as competitive opportunity.
Yeah,
which was quite a nice way to talk about it. And then ESG was, environmental social growth, which we really liked, because then you're not eliminating growth from what organization, building out business case, which is ultimately, businesses want to grow, they want to make profit, they need to make money. So environmental social growth, I thought, was a great way of reframing that for the business case.
Yeah, because if it's just about governance, all of a sudden it's putting everything into compliance and legal checkbox, tick boxing. Yeah. And so this idea that it's a living, breathing way of business evolving. We really aligned with that.
No, I think that's fascinating. Well, actually, so that sort of comes to my next question, really, which is so this is Caroline's view of the world, but I have long believed that making sustainability a business imperative requires a fairly hefty dose of enlightened self-interest, with the emphasis on the word enlightened, on the part of the business leaders. How do we as marketers guide our leaders, guide the boards of our companies onto this enlightened path? Because it feels to me like that is the way forward, back to the point of, businesses don't want to not grow, they don't want to, atrophy and die. But they're not necessarily tuned in yet to the opportunity that this actually offers them.
I think you answered this question when you came on our podcast, Caroline, when you said you've got to build the business case and don't lead with it's a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's the decent thing to do. You have to put it into a business case.
Yeah.
And I think that is where, traditionally a few years ago, marketers would be like, well, it's really hard to build a business case around that. But actually, I think that's absolutely moved completely into the possibility of it's not easy, but you absolutely can build a business case around it now. If you look at, the fact that the landscape is changing, if you look at the fact that the operating landscape is changing and behaviors are changing, and customer wants, people wants are changing, investors are looking at a completely different thing. And I think you can bring all of those elements together and build a fairly strong business case for change moving forward, bringing in the opportunities.
Yeah, we just recently had a conversation with Chris Baker of Serious Tissues, who is a CEO of a social impact business, but he's also just completed a book all about the social impact businesses and how they are driving change, but also what is the kind of critical success factor. And it all comes down to the financials. You know, you're not going to get investment if you cannot justify that this is going to hit the bottom line in a positive way. And so it's a kind of win-win. Yes, do the growth and make it hit the bottom line in a positive way, but if you can do that whilst driving positive impact at the same time, even better. So it's a challenge but any innovation and growth is a challenge anyway. So if we're going to do growth, then let's make it good growth.
And sustainable growth.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, my observation of in business is that altruism in a corporate organization is a marvelous thing in the good times, but when things get tough, take the financial crash, whatever that was 16 years ago.
Yeah.
It goes out the window, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so it has to be kind of totally embedded in part of the business case. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in the book, one of the things that I found especially interesting and helpful was you talked about the need and the value of sustainability reporting. And again, this is not something that marketers are necessarily that familiar with. So how would we get started with that, and how do we use it to drive that business strategy, that business case?
So the reporting side of things is really about the visible accountability of what it is that you're doing. So like anything, it's the output, isn't it? This is our intention, and this is how we're actually doing. And of course, we talk about sustainability reporting in a couple of ways throughout the book. It's covered in a few different chapters in different ways. One bit is about communicating it. One bit is about understanding what's going into it. And I think that if we look at it from both those different perspectives, marketers wouldn't ordinarily be privy to necessarily being part of the sustainability report, because typically or traditionally that has been a financial output. These are the elements that we have to kind of hit for our financial shareholder reporting, and therefore marketers aren't necessarily privy to that. But increasingly, as there has been more visibility from or more desire from the whole stakeholder chain, not just investors looking inwards to see how that business is performing, but employees, talent wanting to understand, new talent coming in, wanting to understand the credentials of that business, employees, customers, partners, suppliers. Since that has broadened and organizations have to be more visible, then it turns into the kind of the narrative, the story of what the organization is setting out to do with regards to their stance around sustainability. And who better to be aligned with the storytelling and making sure what's on the inside is being cascaded to the outside in a way that meets the needs of different audiences than the marketers. Because typically sustainability impact reports are kind of plonked on the website, and it's a one size fits all. It's there, it's kind of tick the box, one and done. It's not tailored for customers, it's not tailored for employees. It's often more tailored for financial investors, and therefore it certainly isn't mobilized and brought to life. It's a kind of, it's up there. We've got that done, and now let's get on with the next year's. And so we see that as a huge missed opportunity, that actually if it's seen as almost like the heart of what this business is achieving, and how do we communicate that to all the different stakeholders, it's kind of going back to good old-fashioned marketing, right message, right person, right time, talking to them in a way that actually means something to them, meets them where they are at. And an investor is going to be at a very different place than your employees. So how do you mobilize that? How do you continually tell that story so that you bring to life all the work that is going into these impact and sustainability reports? Because from every team that I've spoken to and Gemma has spoken to over the past few years, these reports are at least a year in the making. There is an enormous amount of research and investment and resource that goes into the development of them. And then it's kind of just left. And so from our perspective, we're saying, hey, marketers, get right on in there at the beginning, understand what they're about, and be the storytellers, bring it to life and keep it going, keep this narrative going, because it will inform what it is that you're talking about that brand, about their values, around how they're connecting with key stakeholders that really matter to the business. So we cover it in a few ways throughout the book.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. So then building on that point about, stakeholders and all of the stakeholders, obviously getting buy-in is always a challenge for marketers driving kind of new directions in their organizations. How do you approach this across all your different stakeholders? So employees and customers and investors, and perhaps the most difficult of all, your boss. So I'm thinking maybe the CEO.
I think well, as we cover it in the book, there are many different ways which they can be approached, and it's the first part of the book sets out the operating landscape, and it starts off with Earth as a stakeholder, moving all the way through to the various things that are happening, and the fact that carbon literacy is a thing, and the need for collaboration and to be working collectively across functions. I think for a lot of organizations, it's all very siloed. So the sustainability teams look after sustainability and operations looks after operations. But if you think about it, operations also are in charge of the supply chains, and that's where a lot of the sustainability issues and challenges and opportunities lie. And then you've got marketing who are out there bringing in, what the insights from the consumers and what's happening out there. And breaking down, I think one of the first steps is to break down those silos. And as we put in there, the work from Project Drawdown, that everybody's role has an element of sustainability in it. No, you don't have to be an expert on everything to do with sustainability, but you need to have an awareness of it, because it's something that's happening in our everyday lives, whether it's professional or personal. So I think, one of the first barriers and first ways is to build up that case and speak to the stakeholders, is talk to them where they're at. If you go and speak to operations, we have a model that we created, which is inwards, upwards, outwards in relation to your sustainable agenda and your marketing, your role as a marketer. And the first is inwards. Have you spoken to other functions and departments in your organization? Do they know sustainability is on their agenda as well, and they have a level of degree of responsibility for it? What are their thoughts on it? What do they value? Is it something that they think about? And I think by opening up those conversations, asking yourself the question, is our sustainable, is it clear? Have we got clarity? Does everyone understand what our sustainable agenda even is? And I think until you can answer that, it really doesn't, the CEO may have a view on it, but if it's not shared by everyone in the organization, it's definitely not going to progress. So I think that is probably one of the first fundamental steps, is to work cross-functionally, tear down the silos, and, speak to those people that may, not work in sustainability, but have a personal passion for it, and they can bring a lot to it.
Yeah. And we both, Gemma and I, went to a breakfast last week where we were hearing from one organization where that's exactly the challenge they were talking about. And they talked about the squeezed middle, that sometimes the leadership team are fully bought into sustainability, and you might have some kind of activists and from pushing up from the bottom, but the middle kind of management that have got their targets and they're being measured about various bits and pieces, and they're saying, this is all very well and good, but I've got these other bits to be doing. How do you change them? How do you change their hearts and minds to get aligned? And as Gemma said, that comes back to the whole of the organization understanding just how important this is, that it is embedded into the heart of strategy. It isn't something that's done on the side. This is something that the organization is living and breathing. They make that very clear and simple, and that is cascaded through the whole organization, so everybody understands the role they play. And I think one of the quickest ways of getting everybody on board is to align their KPIs and their performance with the agenda of the sustainability agenda, so that their performance is based on what the organization wants to achieve in this area. And for us, we see that as low-hanging fruit. You know, it's kind of like, if you want to embed this, then start with making people accountable for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Behaviours and attitudes are obviously really key to achieving this kind of change. So not just that alignment of goals and objectives, but the behaviours and attitudes of us as citizens, as well as us as marketers. I particularly loved the heading in, I think it was chapter 32, where you talk about the move from making normal things seem green to making green things seem normal. I mean, I just I can't help myself. I love wordplay, and that's very beautiful, and it sounds quite simple in a way, but and it also sounds very powerful, but I suspect it's not remotely simple. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that challenge and making normal things seem going from making normal things seem green to making green things seem normal? Is that kind of normal washing? Is that what we're talking here?
Hopefully.
We took that from John Grant, the wonderful John Grant. That was his quote that we put in the book there. And it you know, sustainability it's got this thing about it where people think it's about, you've got to do less, and it's about telling you can't do things, and it's, you know, and people, naturally your mindset is, don't tell me what to do, you know. And if you know, and it's not about that. And I think what we really want to uncover and show people, and especially marketers, when they're talking about sustainability, is don't use the S word. You know, let's not put it and anchor it all to sustainability, because naturally you're going to get this mindset where you switch off because you feel like you're being told what to do. And let's look for the fact that, you know, we take any product we've sold up until today, and we sell it on the benefits and the value that it brings to people. And I think it's about aligning the values of what people want and what society and the planet needs and what business needs, and telling that story around that product or service. But I think we've become so ingrained, well, this is a green product, and obviously, you know, that means it comes with a load of restrictions and barriers. And it's about switching your mindset to, what are the opportunities around this? And I think there's, you know, social impact companies absolutely lead as exemplars. We interviewed the founder of Upcircle Beauty, and, you know, the story, the podcast is coming out soon, but the story she has to tell around the products that they make from coffee and rose petals and fruit, and it's circular from the very core, and how they've got a refill model. And at Christmas they were just overwhelmed with the feedback from their communities that they have, and they invite them in and talk about, you know, getting ideas from them and how they take those forward. And it just was a fabulous example of how you can take something without even saying the word sustainability and turn it into an amazing story. And I think we almost have to push that word aside and hand someone something and say, this piece of innovation, how would you get people to embrace that? How do you change their mindsets, which then leads to behavioral change and get them talking about it? And so it's just rethinking it, isn't it? It's not completely changing what we do. And I truly believe we're completely capable of doing this.
Yeah.
It's just there's a stigma. It seems to still be a bit of a stigma attached to sustainability, that it's trying to prevent you from making money. And it really isn't.
Yeah. Or it's a campaign.
Yeah.
Or it's a campaign rather than it's just what we do.
Yeah. Somebody told me, I was talking to somebody earlier this week who was telling me about a piece of research that's been looking at the vegan labeling on plant-based foods, and how some companies are now taking that off because people who are not vegans, who are very happy to embrace plant-based food as part of their diet, but don't want to be particularly in that camp of, oh, I'm a vegan, or I'm partly a vegan or whatever, and it's actually having a negative impact on their sales, and actually highlighting the deliciousness of the food rather than and maybe some of the health benefits of it without actually giving it a label and all of that. It's fascinating, isn't it, how these things play out.
Bristol was named the vegan capital of the world at one point, and they did it they did it they had three-pronged approach. They had people that were vegan who went out and not demonstrated but educated people on the benefits of plant-based diets and, you know, what happens to animals in a very specific way, which wasn't sort of like, you know, shouting at you. They then got together with the chefs of the restaurants within Bristol, and they got them to make meals, you know, plant-based meals. And then they simply moved it to the top of the menu and spoke about it in exactly the same way they would talk about any other dish. And it skyrocketed. And hey, it didn't become a thing, you know.
It's a perfect example, isn't it? A very accessible example. I want to go back to something you were talking about, Gemma. You were talking about collaboration within an organization, collaboration across functional, you know, departments and teams. But also in the book, you talk about, you make, I think, a very compelling case for collaboration and partnership from what would perhaps normally be competitive organizations, competitive one with another. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how organizations can find those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about collaboration in a number of ways. We talk about partnerships through things like, so there's cause marketing partnerships. Pampers do it with the vaccinations, don't they? So there's those sorts of partnerships out there. And then there is cross-industry partnerships, and then within industry partnerships. And our message around it is that we can't do this on our own. We have to absolutely work together. But then there are, you know, if an industry works as one, we are going to move at a much faster pace. And Michelle was looking recently at the fact that Unilever and Too Good To Go have partnered in terms of the food waste. And I think through partnering, there's just so many opportunities moving forward. You can go into new markets, therefore you can tick that box. You can tick the commercial, you know, metrics and objectives, as well as ticking the sustainability one. So you can open up new markets, you can gain new insights and understanding, you can build trust a lot faster if you're working with a partner who is already, you know, trusted in that space. And you can drive advocacy for what you're doing. And I think there's just so much to be said for partnering and driving that forward as a way of, again, building that business case and creating those opportunities, those, you know, and there's collaborative advantage there, which I think is really strong. I think Paul knows all about that, you know, and it really is a key piece. And so, you know, as we talk about in the book, there are many different ways of partnering, and it gives marketers so much more to talk about as well. And they can talk about it with the partner's marketing department. And then it goes beyond the campaign, doesn't it? And becomes something that the organization really lives by, and it runs through to their purpose and the core of why they exist, and gives them more meaning behind why they exist.
Yeah.
And I think there's exciting opportunities in unusual partnerships, things that would not normally happen. You know, a social impact startup working with a huge global organization, but solving a problem that huge organization can't solve fast enough. But by working with a small impact business that's nailed it, can actually learn. So it's almost like that reverse mentoring aspect that is going on, which I think is really exciting for organizations to be learning from each other.
Yeah, and I know you talk in the book about, you know, the power of small and mighty in terms of SMEs. So you know, as well as kind of not-for-profits. So that's amazing. The final chapter in the book is really a call to action. It calls on all of us to commit to using our skills as a force for good. What are the obstacles to making that commitment for each of us as individuals, do you think?
I mean, the final chapter, we didn't want to just go and the end. We really, you know, as we're reading it through and talking about it, we're like, do you know what, we do need to create a call to action here. We do need to summarize. We do need to throw out, you know, ideas of how you can take this forward. And we then opened up that we wanted to hear from everybody as they go through that journey. So I think how people can kind of go about that. I'm trying to think, Michelle.
I mean,
my brain goes.
Yeah, well, some of the obstacles which Caroline asked about, what are the obstacles? The obstacles are going to be the business case. So, you know, why should we be doing this? There's also going to be obstacles around the organization you're in. Are they open-minded? Do they have that growth mindset? Are they stuck in the past? Are they absolutely burying their head in the sand and not looking up? And some organizations are, and therefore, you know, if your voice is not going to be heard, one of the obstacles is, can I make change here? Is this something that is so important to me now that am I in the right place? And that could be an enormous life-changing. It was for me, it was for Gemma. You know, we didn't expect to be on the trajectory we are on, but the more you learn, the more you can't do anything else, because it becomes part of you know, your very intention. And so you make some difficult decisions, and you get uncomfortable, and you become inconvenient, and you start asking difficult questions. And that kind of tracks back to our manifesto, where we're saying, you know, marketers, this isn't going to be easy. It's not a natural transition. We've got all the skills, and we've got all the resources, and we've got all the insights to be able to do this. But it's not kind of like everybody saying, hey, we need the marketers now to help us transition into this new phase of business. And so we have to evidence. We have to build that business case. We have to evidence. We have to showcase the detail. We have to build the strategic plan and focus, and then we have to kind of start banging on the right doors and saying, have you seen this? Have we understood this? Could we try and do things differently? Could we pilot something? Could we experiment? Could we test? And I guess that's going to come down to your courage and your patience. Am I in the right place? Is this moving as fast as I want it to be? Do I need to jump ship and go and work with a social impact business where I can just mobilize this? Or am I going to actually build the business case in here because, you know, I need to? So I think there's a lot of that last section, having read all through the book, which we don't expect everybody to read it end to end. You know, we've designed it so it's dip in and outable. But if you are going to read it end to end, that culmination at the end is, so now what? And that, I think, is down to the personal kind of values and intention of the reader. You're going to get something useful from the book at various different points. But if you're really going to say, you know what, this has changed me, or this has been niggling in me, and now I need to go off and do something differently, then I think it is about strategy, business case, evidencing all of that, courage, and a bit of a sense check to, am I in the right place? Is this going to work? Maybe I need to go off and do something different.
And I think another big obstacle is knowledge and understanding and awareness of what's, you know, it's such a massive subject, and that's why we wrote it as 101 chapters, and we've tried to cover absolutely everything in a succinct way of, you know, what is it, why does it matter, where does marketing fit, and then giving 3 actions. So there's 303 actions in the book that marketers can take away, because on the face of it, it's so overwhelming, and it is an overwhelming subject, you know, and it's changing and it's moving all the time, and the conversation is growing and growing and growing. And with that, you've got, you know, new legislation, new guidelines, things you can't say, things you can say, the reporting, sustainability reporting, you know, and how do you green your channels, and then what's your own carbon footprint? You think, oh my goodness, you know. And that is a massive obstacle, because the easy thing to do is to switch off and just keep doing what you're doing, isn't it? Or kick that can down the road, which is what a lot of businesses are doing because of the implications and the cost implications and things like that go with it. So I think, you know, 101 chapters will hopefully, as people dip in and out of it, they can start to gain more knowledge and understanding, and then that kind of drives that passion and want to do something.
I just would observe it's an interesting thing, Michelle, when you're saying people, ultimately there's a big piece of this is about courage. And courage often comes from having great support around you.
Yeah.
So Paul and Anna, I'm just wondering, going forward, we might find ourselves in Marketing Kind needing to kind of expand what we do to be that kind of courage support for people who aren't in the right place. But I just want to share, it's not to do with sustainability, but I had a really fascinating conversation with an amazing recruiter who actually has an OBE for being amazing in recruiting from diverse communities into executive positions. But we were talking about NED roles, and I was being very absolutist about, well, I really am not interested in being a NED in an organisation that really doesn't understand diversity and inclusion in a meaningful way. I'm not. And he said to me, Caroline, that is the wrong way to think about it.
Yeah.
The very places that you need to consider being a NED are the ones who don't get diversity and inclusion, because they're never going to solve that problem. Therefore, we as a society aren't going to solve that problem if people like you who are passionate about it don't get in there and do something about it.
Yeah.
And so for one, I'd like to raise my hand to offer support to anybody who is struggling with exactly what you have written about and what you've been talking about today, in an organisation who doesn't get it yet. So, please stick with it and get help, because we're never going to solve this. We're never going to fix this if we don't change the Luddites, if we don't change the Neanderthal attitudes. We should give the rest of these lovely people an opportunity to ask you questions, not just Caroline. And I just want to say, I don't want to close the exchange without asking Michelle and Gemma to give us a little bit of a sneak preview of Com1, which is coming up next month. But before I do that, let's give you all a chance to ask some questions. So if you'd like to raise your digital hand, as the saying goes.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts had occurred to me. Actually, I'll go with this one first. You're getting past masters at writing books, and this is maybe slightly off topic, but a lot of our members, a surprising percentage of our members, have written books, and I know a lot are also considering it. Michelle, you've written several before. This is your second one together. What have you learned about how to make book writing a key part of how you bring change to the world? What does this year ahead look like? We'll come to Com1 shortly, but beyond that, what does this year look like, and how has the relationship between your work and change making and the books sort of evolved from book to book?
How has it changed? So from book to book, the first book was really more of a wake-up call for I think Gemma and I, fair to say. I don't think we knew we wanted to write something because we had that sense of tension about the role marketing played, but we didn't quite understand the operating landscape we were operating in. And so it was more of a research, let's dig into this and let's find out what the issues really are. And that was the first book. So the first book was very much about landscape. And I would say that since that, Gemma and I were very much of the opinion that, oh, wow, now we've our eyes opened and we can't stop. We need to keep this conversation going, hence why we moved into the podcast. From the podcast and from the kind of, and then we also agreed collectively that education and awareness as marketers, because it was definitely something that wasn't on the agenda. It was definitely nothing we'd ever learned about. Education and awareness was something that we wanted to bring to the world of marketing around sustainability and the role marketing played around behavioral change, conversation, communication, storytelling. And so those were the areas that we've been focusing on. And of course, that has led us to do work with organizations. And it's just a continuous learning journey. And so that all kind of became compacted into, it's almost like, oh my goodness, we're learning so much and there's so much to know. What's the best way to disseminate this? The podcast is really useful, but how can we just synthesize everything into something that is short, succinct, and very action focused? Because sustainable marketing, how to drive profits with purpose was like the big, whoa, you know, this is the landscape and this is big stuff. And there were some actions in there. It was very action focused. But this now is, this is what you need to know. This is what you need to do. There's so much going on. Here is a helpful kind of guidebook to support you on your way. So where we are now is action. This is now all about action. This is now all about, okay, yes, there's still stuff to learn. Yes, people need to be educated, but you need to be educating and doing stuff, because 2030 is getting very close. Urgency and importance around this area is increasing. We're seeing reports coming out of the IPCC. We're seeing the realities of climate change. And it's, you know, as marketers immersed in this, it's very easy to kind of forget what's going on in the big outside world. So you have to kind of keep aware of all of that overwhelm at the same time. And so I would say what we've learned is that when there is a lot going on, if you can synthesize it into practical action to support people in taking action, that's what this second book was all about. So it's all about action, and Gemma and I's trajectory this year is continuing with action around educating. We've scaled our training courses and things online, so that, because we can't be everywhere teaching people everything, so we've scaled that. We are continuing with supporting people with their education and awareness, and also supporting organizations with implementation and action. So I would say, Gemma, it's all about action.
Absolutely, it is. It's about doing stuff now. I think we know we have a massive issue in the world, and we talk about it, and we've got to keep talking about it. We've got to start doing something about it, and we just want to give as much knowledge and information to people to do that.
You could choose either of these two questions, actually, but just in response. One thing that occurs to me is, you know, this is the biggest year for democracy that there's ever been. You know, more people will vote in a general election this year than ever before. And it doesn't really seem that a progressive, satisfactory approach to climate compatible living is really what's guiding the balance of those elections. What can we do about that, or what is that showing is going wrong in terms of our narratives? And then also, you know, where are we stuck in a potentially too narrow a focus on net zero and emissions reductions, which is important, but where does that need to be a more compelling story of broader resilience and positive living that attracts people?
I think I'm halfway through Outrage and Optimism's latest podcast, which is all about this is the biggest year of democracy and how complicated and absolutely terrifying it is what some of the outcomes could be. I know we've got, you know, we talk about it a lot. There is a leadership crisis, isn't there? And governments can't and aren't moving fast enough, and they've got short-term views, and it's almost, you know, the climate change in the planet has become very politicized. But I think in terms of, in answering your question around focusing in on carbon and emissions, I think, you know, that's become a bit of a headline, but that's not, and it's a massive issue, but I think we can't get stuck on focusing on just that. Michelle and I have just finished doing a biodiversity mini series for the podcast, and actually, you know, biodiversity, if we start fixing some of that, then, you know, by default we start fixing some of the carbon issues and as well, which then by default starts to fix some of the climate change issues and the impacts around, you know, the adverse weather events. So I think we need to start talking about things more broadly and making it more personal, as opposed to honing in on emissions and carbon, because actually no one really understands carbon and emissions, do they? And we can teach it through carbon literacy, but from a business perspective, it's a number and you can't see it. Whereas what they talked about on our podcast is biodiversity and nature and trees and animals and the ocean and all of that. There's some real personal connection there. So I think, you know, there has got to be, I think as marketers, we've got to start talking about the stories that resonate with people. And I think it's about not focusing on that one big issue, which is net zero, because that doesn't really translate to people in their everyday lives. And you talk about people have got to change how they live. And I think people are willing to look at how they change how they live. I think things aren't great at the moment, are they? And once you start to learn this stuff, absolutely. I gave up meat now. I don't eat meat anymore as a result of this. And I choose how I travel with a lot more consideration than I ever used to. So I think by default, naturally, you start to change what you're doing. But no, it's a terrifying year for elections.
Biggest year for democracy, but possibly the scariest year for democracy.
Yeah,
all at the same time.
Absolutely.
Roy.
Yes, thank you. Gemma and Michelle, that was fascinating. I'm going to take you a few thousand miles away, and actually it follows up Paul's point on democracy and elections. I am aware that in the next 10 years, the annual growth rate of some of the most used materials in several of our typical consumer sectors, and I mean here detergents, fabric softeners, and fast fashion and aviation, the use of those materials will double. Okay, whether we like it or not, that's what will happen. And one of the reasons is, and I'm going to introduce India into this conversation, because we'll have 1.5 billion more people who will be what I would term middle class. What advice would you give to marketers who are in those major corporates, who've got to deal with the fact that the corporates wish to grow by, frankly, selling a lot of stuff to those people in India and China? And that will cause, by the way, that doubling of the use of those kinds of chemicals and materials that come essentially from fossil fuels. So what advice would you give them?
I mean, we had this conversation again just today, actually, Roy, with Chris from Serious Tissues, when we were talking about how do these small competitors compete when the large organizations are going to be servicing and carrying on and doing what it is that they do. And I guess from a, if it was advice to the marketers, once you're educated and aware of the impact of not changing, the impact of what it is that your products and services are putting out into the world, and there is a very clear business case for doing things differently, and that there are disruptors doing things differently, and good business is good for business. There are good profits to be had. There's great opportunities. It's leading with those stories. It's driving, it's not about growth. It's not about not going into new territories with growth products, but it's about making, if we are going into those territories that will require these solutions, can those solutions be so much better? So it's a win for both the organization and it's a win for the planet. So we're eradicating, we're cleaning up the mess. And it doesn't mean we're not servicing people. It doesn't mean we're not meeting their needs, but we're meeting their needs in a way that is less harmful, or not harmful at all, or indeed regenerative, even better, if indeed we can be meeting those needs and it's got a double play that it's actually doing something positive for people and planet at the same time. So I think it comes back to that inwards, upwards, that you get really educated about what's going on and understand the innovations. And Chris was talking to us today about, I think it's Procter & Gamble that are driving this incubator internally. They've got this startup little incubator that they're driving around innovations around the things they're doing so that they can solve those problems of growth into those new territories, but with products that aren't actually damaging and detrimental, but are actually having a win and regenerative solution. So in 10 years' time, our hope is that all businesses are kind of thinking about that, because it's an opportunity not to be missed. We don't want to have that, as he said, the Kodak moment, where everybody kind of realizes that, oh, we should have moved and we didn't. And so that's what I would say, as the marketer: build education and awareness for yourself, build it internally, look at drive for innovation, drive for doing things differently, so that you're solving. Wim Vermeulen, when he came on the podcast, he said every day marketers need to be asking the question, am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem? And if I'm part of the problem, what am I going to do to be part of the solution? So education, awareness, doing everything you can to build the business case to do things differently.
That's great. You're an optimist.
I'm
a pessimist. That's why we work well together.
Gemma. Okay, it's a great combination anyway. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Roy. Nick.
First of all, thank you very much. That was really brilliant to listen to that. I like one of the first steps was actually getting people as individuals to do something themselves, and I think that's still a massive step in lots of cases now. Yeah. A long time ago, I wrote a PhD on the formation of the German Green Party. If anyone's got insomnia, you're more than welcome to read it. But that took 21 years from them starting it to getting into a minority power position. Right? Yeah. Now, as individuals, I wonder what your thoughts are on how we influence the organisations that we work for, because they are more powerful than we are, yeah, as an individual, yeah. And if you look at the changing social contract and all the rest of it with people, I think the power of the employee, it's not quite football territory yet, where you can do whatever you want to if you're really good at football, but is a really interesting way to try and drive change, because the speed of change is far too slow, yeah. And how do we amplify it? And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
I think climate quitting, and I think the power of employees is absolutely growing. They're becoming a much more powerful stakeholder than they used to be. And I've been reading a lot of examples of people that are walking away from the organizations that aren't meeting their values and aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Michelle and I often get emails from marketers who go through our 100 points challenge or listen to the podcast that say, actually, I was really quite lost in my career as a marketer. I knew I was a massive part of the problem, but now I see a way through what I've learned to go and look for an organization that meets my values. And I think organizations are starting to listen to this a bit more. I think, did anyone read this week that Deloitte are now going to run sustainability training through their entire organization, because they see it as such a huge requirement, and it's something that they're going to start to advise on, because actually, people, especially the generation coming up through, they are far more choosy about where they work and who they want to give their time and value to. So I think there is a shift. I think there is a very slight power shift. I know we all have to, pay mortgages and our bills and everything, but I think people are voting with their feet, and they are looking for organizations, and it's not all about making money. It's about actually delivering value and feeling that you're part of the solution.
Yeah.
How do we amplify it, I guess, is the question, because I totally agree with that 100%. Thank you.
And there are organizations, Nick, that are where they've started off with just like 1 or 2 employees, have got together, created a green team, or they've done some carbon literacy training, and then they are getting others on board. I think Salesforce, their Earthforce team now is 5,000 strong. It started off with 3 employees. Auto Trader, 2 employees now. 80% of their organization are carbon literate. The Environment Agency, I mean, you'd expect the Environment Agency, but 90% of their employees are carbon literate.
If they're not doing it, we're all fucked, aren't we?
Exactly. And they're driving these things from the ground up, not just top down. So I think there's real appetite for people, and we've been talking recently to a number of talent acquisition, L&D leads, and they are saying that the requests now and the expectation around what employees are expecting organizations to be doing around sustainability has really shifted. It's kind of hockey stick shifts that they're seeing in what people are expecting those organizations to be talking about and delivering on. So I think as the urgency and the visibility and the reality that we're all feeling is starting to increase, so too is the expectations of organizations. So again, it's that people pressure into the organization, and many organizations are doing really good stuff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're just about out of time, and it has been a fascinating and important conversation, and I'm loath to draw it to a close, but the good news is we get to continue it next month if we all turn up and participate in Con1. So Michelle, Gemma, just like give us 2 minutes, elevator pitch on why we should be there.
So
go on.
Yeah, go, Jem.
Con1 is Conference of the Marketers. We've kind of taken COP and turned it into Conference of the Marketers, and we want Con1 to be different from any other event. We want it to carry on to 2 and 3. Hopefully we won't get to 28 and not have achieved much, but what ultimately we want to do is we want to bring marketers together and organizations together to tackle 3 issues, which is around, we have a panel around decarbonisation and how marketing can support and drive that. We have a panel around storytelling and how we can change the narrative to make green things normal as opposed to the other way around, and how we can change mindsets, behaviors. And then our third panel is on metrics and measures and how do we come up with a standardized framework. And the idea is that we have the panels in the morning, everybody can come in, and Caroline is one of our speakers on the panel. And then moving forward into the afternoon, everybody will be put into one of those 3 groups. And you will work collectively on what we can be doing moving forward. The idea is we won't come up with solutions in the day because that's not possible, but coming out of Con1, we would bring groups together to actually work on these problems live throughout the year, with the view that we come back in Con2. So it may be that people have come out with a common framework that they can share. There's so many organizations out there that are moving to kind of open source platforms and solutions, and we want to do that for marketers and marketing. So it's just the start really, but it would be amazing if you came along on the 14th of March and became part of the action and solution that we're trying to drive, and we will be keeping the conversations going throughout the year.
Yep, and we've got an awesome bunch of panelists that are joining us, with some real, some people that are already ahead of the game, some people that are just very open in sharing what they've been doing to generally. A couple of you are saying, is there any way to join Con1 virtually? What we're going to do is, because the panel sessions we're going to record, so you're going to we can give you access to all of the insights about what the panels are discussing in the morning, and also we're going to record the outcome sessions. It's going to be really, we tried to get one of those spaces where you can bring people in and virtually they sit in groups, but it was just too challenging for the space of time that we have. So whilst people are in the working groups, you won't necessarily be privy to being part of that conversation in the actual working groups where you're addressing key questions, but you will know what the key questions are because they're going to come out of the morning session. And you'll also hear the response back from the group leads and the topic leads back to the whole room about feedback as to where they've got to so far. So there will be 2 pieces that are recorded. It's not going to be as immersive and being there. It's also a relatively, this is our first event of this type, and we also want to keep it quite conversational. So there's only 100 people in the room. It's not like 500 people and we're going to try and manage mammoth conversations. We want people in there that really care about making a difference and are kind of committed to wanting to be part of this Con1 movement, part of keeping it going, and see themselves as a change maker in marketing, and that want to be part of creating some shared solutions. So it's really about the wisdom of the crowd coming together and actually having some practical outputs. So yes, there will be opportunity to get access to the recordings.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So just to say that if you do want to snaffle one of the few remaining places in that 100 group of 100, www.com-event.world is where you need to be. more information and the opportunity to get tickets, and there was a code in the chat, so have a quick look at that. Look, Gemma and Michelle, thank you so much for the time you spent with us today. It's fantastic. As you can tell, I highly recommend the book. I would highly recommend getting your copy. It's a way to get really deep into this, and as you say, you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can dip in and out. It is a brilliant how-to guide. And my copy is already becoming rapidly as well thumbed as my thesaurus was back in the days of my early copywriting career. Thank you again, Gemma and Michelle. Thank you, everybody, for today. And I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Bye.
Thank you.